everyone. My name is Colin Polish, and I'm a manager at Deloitte Consulting in our Applied AI practice. I want to first acknowledge how excited I am to be a small piece of the Google Cloud Next conference and honored to be virtually sitting here with Tiffany Bayer to walk through the population segmentation-based approach we use in the state of Missouri to drive vaccine uptake. Before we dive in there, Tiffany, I wonder if it makes sense to give a bit of background on our partnership throughout the pandemic.
My name is Tiffany Bayer, and I'm with the Department of Health and Senior Services in Missouri with the Center for Local Public Health, and it's a pleasure for me to be here today. To provide some context, Deloitte was contracted to provide analytics support for the state of Missouri. The type of analytics and state partners really did change as the pandemic evolved, but some examples are: in the beginning, we provided geospatial analysis to ensure we had vaccine administrators in the right places that could be reached by everyone, and estimating the size of eligible population as different groups of people become eligible. In the middle, tracking vaccine uptake and assisting with vaccine ordering with an emphasis on equitable distribution. And throughout, monitoring cases and case trends and alerting the state of any emerging or established hotspots.
It really was a partnership where we were able to share data, expertise, and work through some of the most complicated challenges leaders were wrestling with across the country. Throughout our time together, we were fortunate to have detailed data and powerful technology at our fingertips. On the data side, we utilized Deloitte's Health Prism product, which is a data set that contains 1,700 social determinants of health data points on over 240 million adults in the US. And then we paired that with Missouri's COVID case and vaccine information to unlock insights previously unattainable. All processing, model development, and integration with our visualization UI was able to be securely stored and reliably called upon in our Google Cloud environment. We really put the cloud environment to the test, running models on millions of records across hundreds of attributes. But before I dive too much into the technical details, the latter half of our COVID-19 partnership is where we want to focus the discussion today. At the time we kicked off the segmentation analysis, COVID-19 vaccine demand had slowed across the country, and that trend was becoming more and more evident in Missouri as well.
Exactly. When we first embarked on this segmentation approach, the public was really in gridlock. The state messaging for vaccinations was not working for locals, and Missouri was hovering on low vaccinations and flatlining. As we know, a mixture of staunch ideologies, misinformation, and in some cases, issues with access to care were contributing to waning demand for vaccine. So we needed to make some changes. So we decided to move from a general to specific, tailored approaches. A lot of public health agencies, Missouri included, were focusing too much on statewide general, one-size-fits-all messages for the public, and they just did not want to hear those anymore. Desire for a more nuanced approach to shift from generalized statewide work to something completely new to better administer tailored public health programs. If you walk away with anything today, we want you to know that through this approach, you can move beyond wide broadcasting of messages and towards a more customized messaging for preventive and precise public health.
With that framing in mind, at a high level, our goal was to use analytics to identify subgroups of the population, and then to lean on behavioral science to use those subgroups to find who might be movable to vaccination and or who might still be facing structural or access obstacles towards vaccination. This approach, which I would like to note, can be applicable to really any public health priority with some customization, involves three major steps. Step one is gathering the right data. In my mind, this is the most critical step, as these are the inputs for the segmentation and the building blocks for the entire approach. To do that, we merged together data from Deloitte's Health Prism dataset, we utilized Missouri's vaccination data, and we also pulled public data from sources like ACS. We then used feature selection techniques, such as regression analysis, to identify variables that had an impact on vaccine hesitancy in Missouri. Step two is the unsupervised learning part of the process. So we took those variables from step one as inputs to a clustering model at the census tract level, of which there are about 1,400 in Missouri. This outputted 10 unique groups of census tracts or communities across the state that had varying levels of vaccine uptake, as well as different drivers of health attitudes and structural access to vaccination. And then the final step, step three, is taking these statistical clusters and making them actionable for public health users. Primarily, we did this by mapping where each segment resides across the state and then creating profiles for each segment. And we'll give you more details on those profiles in just a minute. First, we want to show the results of the clusters mapped spatially across the state of Missouri. Clear patterns emerged. For instance, segments B, C, and G were concentrated in the most urban parts of the state, while segments A and E were predominantly in rural areas. Areas with greater population density, so think Kansas City, St. Louis, Springfield, had a more diverse distribution of clusters compared to the less populated rural parts of the state. And I'll just quickly touch on the right-hand side of the slide that shows that we further group these 10 clusters into 3 groups based on barriers to vaccination and vaccination trends, with a particular emphasis on recent vaccine uptake.
This output certainly tracked with our knowledge of the communities across the state, but more importantly, it unlocked a new data-backed picture of the population that enabled state leadership and local public health officials to identify those residents who were most resource-constrained, might be open to vaccination, and most in need of a tailored vaccine outreach. New opportunities for collaboration also emerged from this. This identified regions of the state far away from other communities that are similar in population, challenges, and complexities. This turned on a light bulb for us that we could match up and group administrators to facilitate peer-to-peer learning from their fellow local public health departments. Through these segments, we were able to bring in health departments that may not typically work together, but are very similar in the burdens they face, and they could work collaboratively to develop and share best practices to address some of their health needs. This was put into action via a series of strategy labs, which we will talk about more in just a moment.
At its core, we wanted to put information in the hands of the LPHAs. Due to time constraint, I will go through just one of our 10 segments. So the analysis is really split into 2 parts. The first view is a deep dive on who makes up the segment. So this includes demographic factors such as race information and age distribution, along with additional social determinants of health variables with an understanding of values such as their importance on personal health, which we pulled from Health Prism. That data informs the second view, which focuses on outreach recommendations to help drive people to vaccination. For example, one of our segments, segment C, had more access barriers. So one outreach recommendations would be to make things as accessible as possible, like setting up consistent pop-up clinics where people in that segment live, work, and play. Because each segment is different as a byproduct of the clustering, each segment has different recommendations tailored to their needs.
This information is really critical, but it has no value unless it's disseminated in an actionable way. In that respect, implementation at the local level was key for us. While we created a state-level analysis with all 10 segments, what we found most powerful was working with leaders of the local public health agencies to equip them with more nuanced information on their county or city level populations in order to form a more precise outreach. Based on which segments fell into certain areas across the state, we brought LPHAs together that had similar distributions and facilitated live brainstorming sessions to both dive deeper into data and discuss options for outreach. This exercise provided officials a new forum for them to collaborate and enabled some really fruitful dialogue and action planning. Overall, we got resounding feedback from the LPHAs that this approach had a massive impact, enhancing both their understanding of their populations and their outreach strategies.
Yeah, that sentiment was really born out of some post-lab evaluation metrics that we collected across the 112 unique attendees that joined one of the 3 sessions. So 88% found the lab series helpful, but I would argue more importantly, 92% plan to enact a new strategy based on the lab series. An example of one such strategy is a bingo and boosters event in Audrain County, which focused on the hesitator communities that had particularly low booster rates. We could also see in the data that during the duration of our lab series, the hesitator community, so one of those 3 groups on the previous slides, saw their vaccination increase the most, with double-digit percentage increase in uptake. We were able to use the flexibility and security of Google Cloud and the Health Prism product to power a COVID-19 application of data in behavioral science. That said, as we've mentioned before, this approach can really be applied to a wide range of public health issues to identify barriers and strategically invest in programs most likely to meet the needs of an identified focus group.
This process not only equipped our local public health leaders with new information and visuals they had not seen before, but also really opened our eyes to a new process of devising more tailored strategies using data.
Thanks everyone for joining our session, and please feel free to reach out if you have any comments or questions.